Welcome everybody for our second chat. I'm Joe Favorito. We're joined today by Jessica Berman, who's the Associate Commissioner of the National Lacrosse League. As you guys have read in Jessica's bio, she's the highest ranking female official for a men's professional sport in the world right now, with the National Lacrosse League. But she's got a great background from the NHL. She went to Michigan. She's a lawyer. She went to Fordham Law School, has two great kids. She can talk about work-life balance, all the things that you'd like to hear from. She's the president of the Sports Lawyers Association. So I'm not going to talk very much. We're going to turn it over to you guys. The rules we have, mute your mic if you're not going to ask a question. When you ask a question, remember to unmute your mic. And most importantly, tell Jessica who you are and where you're from. So Jessica, you want to kind of give us the Jessica Berman story for 5 or 6 minutes before we go to the questions?
Sure. My background is that I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and fell in love with being a sports fan during my high school years. Mostly was a hockey fan, and actually had experience where I was attending an Islander game and saw two fans embrace following a goal who were clearly from very different backgrounds. And I was sort of mesmerized by that moment of the way that sports has the power to bring people together. Growing up in Brooklyn, I often noticed and actually researched in high school a bunch of papers and poetry I wrote about diversity, and always paid attention to the things in our social fabric that unite communities. And I felt like sports was one of them. And so I just got it in my head that I really wanted to work in sports, mostly because I felt like I could apply my work ethic and passion to something that could really change the world. And so I started to pursue that really from the age of 16. And ultimately went to the University of Michigan, where I worked for the athletic department and was the manager, one of the first managers of the Michigan men's hockey team, baseball team, and football team. Did all their media relations and their statistics. I helped prepare the players for interviews, and that was a great experience. I was a sport management major at Michigan, so got the academic side as well. And then went on to, during my summers while I was in college, worked for sports agents, and started to learn really that side of the business, worked for some journalists, really used my internship years. I guess I'll share this piece since you guys are in high school. I used my summer intern years to really weed out, or as a process of elimination, to decide what I liked and what I didn't like. And what I learned during my high school years was that I didn't want to be on the player side, although I thought I always wanted to be a sports agent. If any of you are interested in being a sports agent, I could explain why. It just wasn't for me for a host of reasons. And I decided I didn't want to be on the media side. And so I went to Michigan, got peeked into the area of law, and ultimately went to Fordham Law School, where I interned at the NFL Management Council, and sort of fell in love with labor relations and collective bargaining. And if you want to be a sports labor lawyer, the best place to go is Proskauer Rose. It's where a lot of the commissioners came out of, and where a lot of the sports lawyers who work at the league offices came from. So I was fortunate enough to get a summer associate position at Proskauer and went into their labor and employment department for 4 years, worked on a variety of sports clients, including the NFL and the NBA and Major League Baseball and Major League Soccer and the NHL. Happened to coincide with the 2004 negotiation, where the NHL had a season-long work stoppage, which was kind of seminal in all of professional sports. It was the NHL's need to get their player costs under control and more predictable. And so I was the associate at Proskauer who was responsible for really managing the back of the house of that negotiation. And after about 4 years, I went in-house to the NHL where for the 2012 negotiation, I was really more of the front of the house, and I was leading different aspects of the negotiation, working closely with the leadership at the NHL. After 9 years of being the deputy general counsel and managing all of labor relations and collective bargaining, a variety of policy and integrity issues for the NHL, I had the itch to learn the business side and really get experience in another area. And I approached the commissioner, and he sort of blessed my vision of building out a strategic corporate social responsibility effort on behalf of the NHL. I saw the headwinds in the sports industry that had already taken hold of corporate America, which was that it was clear that social impact and community engagement was starting to be used for business and for growth strategy as opposed to just helping people. And so I felt like the NHL had an opportunity to really pivot and make their investments in community and social good more strategic so that it can be leveraged for sponsors and storytelling and growth from a revenue standpoint. And so I led the transformation of the work that the NHL had previously done to align with the business objectives of the NHL. And I did that for 4 years. And then I'm now, since September, the deputy commissioner of the National Lacrosse League, where I sort of, I guess, the right hand of our commissioner, Nick Sikevich. Most of my primary areas of focus are leading all of our collective bargaining with our union and our legal work. Also responsible for overseeing our growth strategy, particularly focused on our teams and managing our team services function to really help our teams to grow revenue and relevance in their local markets. And also managing our marketing and communications function, which includes our community engagement and storytelling efforts as well. And Joe is the one who realized that my hiring would make me the highest ranking female. So anytime my kids complain about the Jessica parade, as they call it, I'm going to tell them to call you to complain.
Good. Wouldn't be the first time. Anyway,
Right.
So why don't we get to the questions? So Olivia, you want to kind of get us started?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to say thank you again for coming and talking to us. But obviously, right now, Corona is a huge problem and a big game changer in kind of every part of our everyday lives. And so, we've also heard that the NLL has kind of shut down since for about a few days now. Actually, do you think you could explain this process and why this has happened, and just kind of your perspective on everything?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess I'll start with kind of the evolution of maybe a little glimpse into the behind the scenes of how this all happened or happens at least at our league. So going back to kind of early March when it was clear that this was going to be something, but people, I think, weren't sure what it would be or how it was going to, certainly no one expected it to be what it's become. And I don't think anybody thought we would have to really halt the entire global economy. But I have a very clear recollection of the evening of March 11th. I was actually on a call with our union talking about collective bargaining. It was around 8:30 at night. And I was on Twitter while we were on the phone, and I saw what was going on in the NBA game where the players came onto the court and then they came off. And I immediately got off the phone and called Nick, our commissioner, and I said, I bet a player tested positive and like our whole world's going to change right now. And that night, the NBA suspended their season. And as I like to say, Tom Hanks announced that he had corona. Those were like the two things that I feel like changed the world. And so with those two things, we were actually one of the first leagues to follow the NBA and announce that we were suspending our season until further notice. It's one of the things that I often acknowledge internally within our league to remind people who haven't worked at other leagues that one of the benefits of being an emerging league or a challenger league is that we have the ability to pivot a lot quicker than the big leagues do. And so for us to get our key stakeholders aligned with a new direction is as hard as it may feel at times for the people who are trying to do it relative to the world I came from. It's like lightning speed. So I really appreciate in that moment how quickly we were able to sort of execute what we needed to in order to do what was the right decision, which was to suspend our season and suspend all operations. And we immediately began a series of both internal and external communications, obviously our fans, but internally with our teams, our owners, our presidents, and our players and our union, and all of our key sponsors and media partner to make sure that everybody understood what we were doing and why, and sort of be focused on damage control and control the message about this not being a decision that was panic driven, but rather being a decision that was methodical and proactive. And so from March 12th until yesterday, we've been essentially in a consistent evaluation period where on a day-to-day basis, we've been ideating and brainstorming about whether and how it could be possible for us to resume and what that would look like. From an external perspective, there was still the possibility left open that we could resume regular season. And from a business perspective, we knew that that was not possible for a million reasons, not the least of which the fact that it's essentially the middle of April and we don't know when this is going to end. And, it was starting to bleed into too far out for us to be able to have any hope of salvaging the regular season. We had played about 60% of our regular season, so we were looking at about 40% of our regular season games that were still outstanding. And we made the strategic decision for a variety of factors, mostly, at least from my personal perspective, to get everyone focused on next season from a planning standpoint, to make the decision to announce and be accountable to what I think was probably obvious to everybody. Off the record, I would say that's probably true for a lot of the leagues right now that are currently on pause. Knowing that we all have a clock ticking for when our next season has to start, in order to not have this bleed into next year, there becomes a sort of cost-benefit analysis of leaving this option open and what's the cost of that on the back end. And we made the decision that it was more important to essentially cut our losses on the regular season for this year and redirect our focus to next season. We did leave open the possibility that we could launch a postseason tournament, and we have a committee that continues to work on that. And if and when that becomes possible, we have a variety of scenarios that we could deploy pretty quickly, that all of which have some consensus around in terms of it being an authentic competition. But those will all sort of wait in the wings while we see how this all settles over the next 3 to 5 months. And in the meantime, most importantly, from a business and operations standpoint, our team presidents, our owners now have the closure that they needed to really begin to focus on planning for next year.
Great. Next question.
I think we're just going to open up to the audience. Sorry, the audience, if you guys have any questions. If not, we have some others. I know you can just unmute yourself and then, yeah.
I've got a question. Patrick Rula from the Bay Area. I was just wondering, what prompted your move from the NHL to lacrosse?
Yeah, for me, I had felt like I had reached the point in my career where being at the NHL, there were a lot of benefits to being there, but I felt like if I stayed much longer, it would become harder to leave. It's pretty unusual to stay in the same place, certainly in today's world, for more than 10 years. And at the league offices, we say some people are lifers. I didn't really see myself as a lifer, mostly not because I don't love the NHL, because everyone who knows me says my identity is still intertwined with the NHL, and my kids play hockey, and I love the league and the sport. But from a professional development standpoint, I felt like I wouldn't actually reach my potential if I stayed. It was a really hard decision for me to leave because I felt like I grew up there, and I have so much respect for what they're building. And in some ways, I feel like the last 15 years of the NHL was so transformational, putting Corona aside, assuming this doesn't derail any of their plans, and I don't think it will. I feel like the NHL has finally sort of transcended the niche sport that it was used to be viewed as, and now it's like mainstream, which is what we were working on for all those years. And so I sort of feel like I left at that moment when it was just sort of like hitting its stride in a lot of ways, and they're about to go into their new media deal, or a new media deal with their NBC relationship expiring, which is going to be a big game changer for them. I feel like they've made a lot of strides in terms of tackling their diversity issues and attracting marginalized or underrepresented communities to be fans and to play the game, which I always thought was a big threat to their growth. So I think all those things are going to be great. It's just that I guess at the end of the day, the NHL, I say it's like a ship, it's an enormous ship. And as much as I felt valued and I felt like my contribution was important there, I was just like a cog in a big wheel. And I wanted the opportunity to be able to have more of a direct impact on what I was doing. And so joining the National Lacrosse League, which is kind of like where the NHL was almost like in the 80s or early 90s, is an opportunity to sort of ride that wave again of growth, which I really enjoyed during my years at the NHL. But in this role, I actually have the opportunity to really influence the direction. And so it's a really exciting opportunity for me, both personally and professionally.
Cool. Next one.
I have a question. So from my understanding, you have a large market in Canada, but the US market isn't as big. What sort of marketing efforts have you implemented to increase the relevancy of the teams in the NLL? And what has been the most successful?
Yeah, good question. So I always assume that people maybe aren't that familiar with the NLL or box lacrosse. So what I often say when I talk to student groups in the US is that box lacrosse in Canada is like field lacrosse here. It's like when people say lacrosse in Canada, their default is actually the box game. It's the indoor game. And obviously here, field lacrosse is huge. And so it's like the inverse in Canada. And so you're correct to say that definitely I believe our biggest challenge is relevance. So again, it's very similar to what the NHL used to be, which is that lacrosse in general, not just box, but in general is just very niche right now. Certainly as you kind of rise the ranks beyond the youth level. But the thing that's unique, I think, about lacrosse is that there's sort of like an intersection happening right now where a lot of kids are playing less football and still looking for physical sports. And I think lacrosse will see a lot of growth from that. And we're doing a lot to expand the lens of how we define a lacrosse player. And so you don't have to be a box lacrosse player to love our game or to play our game. A lot of our players in our league, in fact, some of the top players in our league, played field lacrosse in college last year and came into our league this year, and they're crushing it. And so we're doing we're actually in the process of developing, close to launching a campaign to show that intersection. But I would say that the most important thing that we're doing is we recently did some fan research, which showed that most of our fans, the large majority, close to 70% of our fans, are actually not from the lacrosse community. And so those people are, their demographics are that they're millennials and they are event goers and they like to party, they like to have fun. And our events tend to attract that audience. And so it puts us in a unique position. And we've been studying sort of comparable properties like the UFC, where you don't have to be a fighter to love the UFC. They position themselves more as like an entertainment product as opposed to a sport. And our audience, I like to reference one of our teams, our Calgary team. Their marketing tagline is "Come for the party, stay for the game." And I always say that should be our league's tagline, because that's our brand. That's our brand identity, where it's like fun. If you haven't been to a game, I can tell you that they play music during the run of show, and the game presentation is like nothing I've ever seen at an NHL game. Like, the NHL games are very like traditional and it's all about the hockey. This is the exact opposite. It's like, oh, by the way, there's the best lacrosse players in the world happen to be playing a lacrosse game, but we're in the middle of having a party, is kind of the environment. So I think for us, in terms of the more that we can own that narrative and people can view us more as an entertainment product, as opposed to a lacrosse first product, the better it will be for our marketing.
And quick follow-up question. I grew up playing lacrosse, played a little box lacrosse. One of the reasons I was drawn to box lacrosse was because of Lyle Thompson. Have you found that a lot of your audience are field players that see these field players going to box and succeeding, and them wanting to follow and play the sport and watch the sport? Or would you find that that's not true?
No, that's definitely that's a growing trend, I would say. And so if you're a fan, for example, Trevor Baptiste, who played at Denver and is now playing in our league, he's a good example. He has like a huge following of field players who are in high school who are like, wow, like he's playing professional lacrosse, but it's indoor. And I also think that we know that because we do a lot of work with them, we have a strong partnership with college coaches, and you probably know this, college coaches are recruiting kids. Well, first of all, they recruit a lot of Canadian kids because they are good at box lacrosse. But also they look for kids in the US who also play box, because it adds an extra dimension of agility and physicality that you don't get in the field game. And a lot of the college coaches really like that, and they use box lacrosse for training. And so the more that happens and that normalizes, I think the more it's going to be sort of integrated into the culture of the US, on the US side.
Great. Next cue.
I have a question. My name is Huckleberry Jones. I'm from Los Angeles. So my question is, with the up and coming league in the PLL, how do you guys sort of distinguish yourself, and what marketing tactics do you use to sort of push yourself away from them and get fans to your league instead of theirs?
Yeah. Well, I guess from our perspective, we don't really view the PLL as our competition. They don't play at the same time as us. And so, if you follow lacrosse, you probably know that we share a lot of players. So about 75 of our players actually play in the PLL too. So we share our most important asset. which is our players. And so we're actually continue to be, well, since I've joined, I could speak just personally. We speak with them on a very regular basis about forming partnerships and finding ways to collaborate and work together, mostly because we know that the rising tide will lift all boats. The fact that they were so successful in their first year was awesome. Like, we think that's great. The more people who are paying attention to that, the better it is for the sport. I think there's a lot that we could probably learn from each other. Paul Rabel is a fantastic marketer, and he's great. I follow him on social, and I find myself on his Insta stories and sometimes going down the Paul Rabel rabbit hole, watching the stuff he's doing, not from like a NLL research standpoint, but just because he's entertaining. And so I think they're doing an awesome job, and we'll continue to try to identify ways that we can work together. And it's great that, that he's creating additional relevance for the game. We also share an owner. Their primary investor is Joe Tsai, and he owns a team in our league. And so there's a lot of connectivity. And, because we don't directly compete, we have the benefit of being able to look at them more as additive as opposed to being a competitor.
Thank you.
I have a question. Obviously, the sports industry is fairly dominated just by men, kind of executively, but also fan-wise, and it does depend. And now it's seeing a lot more balance between genders. However, what challenges have you really faced in an industry that is, a little bit unbalanced between, gender representation?
I think the main challenge, and I don't think it's unique to sports, and I've done a lot of research and thinking about this topic, so it's something that I think about a lot. The main challenge, I think, with any industry where there's a dominant demographic in a position of power is that they are accustomed to not having to make decisions, hearing the perspectives of other people. And so when you surround yourself with people and executives who think like you tend to be validated in your thinking. And so when you encounter somebody who has a different perspective, and that person is a different race or a different gender, and their experience in life is different, sometimes those situations can be challenging because people are not used to being to having their opinion disagreed with, if that makes sense. So I think the only way really to eradicate that or to begin to tackle that is just experiential. And so, I'm hopeful, certainly your generation, people will have grown up hearing different perspectives, and it won't be so dominated so that anyone will have been conditioned to feel like they can't hear what somebody else has to think. But I don't think that's universal either. I can certainly say in my current situation, even though I'm the only woman in our senior executive team, and we now during this crisis are meeting every single day. During our normal business, we meet every Monday, and Joe is actually part of those conversations as well. There's never a moment where I feel like my voice isn't heard or that I don't have an opportunity to contribute. So I think it probably depends on the individual's experience and how they've been in situations where they were interacting with people from different backgrounds.
Thank you.
The only thing I would add is that I would say for me, growing up in Brooklyn, I was the minority. And so I think I'm pretty accustomed to knowing how to read a situation and knowing when it's appropriate to be more of a listener than a contributor. And I think that comes with a lot of experience of having to sort of live that in your day-to-day life.
Liam Green.
Yeah, I actually didn't introduce myself earlier. I'm Liam. I'm an undergrad at the University of Oregon right now. My question is, can you speak to your NHL CSR objectives that you helped implement, and how are you using those experiences in the NHL? Or the
Yeah.
NLL, rather.
Yeah, I mean, the work I did at the NHL leading their CSR work is some of my proudest work I've ever done. I don't know if any of you guys are hockey fans, but the initiative that I worked on that I'm probably most proud of is in 2017, we launched hockey's Declaration of Principles. If any of you haven't seen that, I'd urge you to check it out. It's essentially a value statement that 17 hockey stakeholders came together to put down on paper their brand values, what they care about, what's the purpose of hockey, why are we doing what we do. And the NHL led that and brought to the table all of the influencers in the hockey ecosystem. So that included our union, the AHL, the NCAA, all of the junior leagues, as well as the International Ice Hockey Federation. And so with that came a whole bunch of community programming that really focused on making sure that hockey was being brought into communities in an age-appropriate way, and specifically focused on ensuring that everyone who participated felt welcome. And so we launched a bunch of initiatives that were geared towards reaching marginalized or under-indexed communities in the sport of hockey, and really focusing on a culture change initiative. So we hosted town halls where we brought groups together in different markets and cities where we got feedback about their experience, and started to really tackle the things in hockey that were a threat to the growth of the game. And so that was really sort of like very deep culture change kind of work that was very emotional, but also very gratifying because it was like really substantive and important. I would say some of the other stuff that I worked on at the NHL was leading their Hockey Fights Cancer initiative. If any of you watch the NHL, you're probably familiar with it. And also their NHL Green, focusing on sustainability, and Hockey is for Everyone as well. And integrating all of those initiatives into our sponsorship partnerships at the league, and attaching branded content to extend the storytelling around those initiatives. At the NLL, we actually have I'm on the board of the University of Michigan sport management program. And we have a group of seniors who are currently doing their capstone strategy senior project, developing our CSR strategy with us. And so next Friday, actually, a week from tomorrow, they're going to be presenting to us. But throughout this semester, well, I went in person in February before Corona started, and gave them an overview of our league and some examples of some case studies of best practices across the sports industry that have used CSR in a way that I thought was the best example for them to model. And they interviewed 10 different industry executives in sports who talked about how CSR could be used for social good and business growth. And so the answer to your question is we're excited to see what people your age tell us we should be doing. So we're really excited to see what the students are going to present next week.
All right, so next up is Lucas Rickman from New York, I believe.
Hi, yes, I'm from New York. So first of all, I want to thank you for the work you've done for the NHL. I've seen it like recently with all these players coming out about recent struggles. So how do you make sure players don't go to these other lacrosse leagues and go to your league instead? Because I've seen like college lacrosse, they're playing outdoors, not indoors.
Yeah. We're trying to influence the field lacrosse game in our partnership through our partnership with US Lacrosse. So, and US Lacrosse has actually recently begun investing resources in the box game. And since they are a very influential stakeholder in the grassroots side of lacrosse, I think that's going to change the landscape of how the box game is viewed significantly. The fact that US Lacrosse hasn't historically invested in the box game is probably the reason it hasn't grown here on this side of the border. But with that sort of falling under their umbrella moving forward, I think that's going to change significantly because they obviously have access to the field lacrosse community. And so they are in the best position to cross promote the box game to the field players.
All right, so next up is Connor Wallace. Connor, can you introduce yourself?
I think we'll move on. I think Madeline Wilson is the next. Madeline, you have a question?
Hi, I'm a senior at Towson University in Baltimore, Maryland. And I was just curious on some advice that you would give a college student who has big dreams to become one of the general managers of a Major League Baseball team, one of the first female general managers of a Major League Baseball team. And what are some advice to overcome the adversity to get into these male-dominated professional sports?
Two things. First would be to network. I don't know. There's one woman who almost got that job. If you don't know her, you should try to meet her. I'm happy to introduce you to Kim at Major League Baseball. She's come the closest, if I'm not mistaken. But networking with others as well. And I think there's a movement happening across the sports industry to really attract women to the front office positions. And I think that will really begin to change. And you're seeing it happen more so in football and basketball, I believe, but even in hockey now, there's women working on the hockey operations side, and that was never the case even 5 years ago. So I think it's changing pretty rapidly. But the second thing is that, and I always say this when I talk to law students who I speak with often who tell me they want to be a sports lawyer, which is that all of these jobs, people will hire for the most part, the most qualified people that they can. So while it's important to have good contacts and network, it's as important, if not more important, to be good at what you do. And, you know, I wish I could say that all of my interns that I've had over the years took advantage of the opportunity that I felt like they had in their role being an intern, whether it was at the NHL or any other places. But for whatever reason, that's not always the case. So what I would say is when you get your opportunities, make sure that you put forth your best effort and work really hard and demonstrate your value. And ultimately, people who are in those positions of power want to have people work with and for them who will make their lives easier. And if you make their lives easier, they will keep you around. And it's really as simple as that. So I think it's pretty easy to make yourself indispensable once you get your opportunity. And the getting your opportunity, unfortunately, is a combination of your network and luck. But if you're passionate and you keep at it, the opportunities, they come around.
I think next we have Chris Tachekos.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, my name's Chris Tachekos. I'm from Haverford, just outside of Philadelphia, and I'm playing lacrosse actually next year at Tufts. And I had a question about the growth of the NLL and how we're seeing more and more lacrosse players make careers out of the sport, and just about the market cap for the NLL. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things I didn't mention before when someone asked me, I forget who it was, about the PLL, is that the other benefit of having the summer leagues is that for a lot of our players, for the first time, they're actually able to make a living playing lacrosse, which is a good thing. So that's another reason that we're actually happy to have the PLL and the MLL employing players in our off season so that our players can be full-time lacrosse players. Not all of our players fit into that bucket. It's actually one of the things that I love the most about our league is that our players are the most amazing lacrosse players in the world, yet they are also lawyers and firefighters and teachers and doctors and scientists. And I'm just like blown away by them, especially coming from the NHL, where the guys in the NHL live, breathe, and sleep hockey from the time they're 4, and like pretty much have nothing else going on in their lives that kind of make them more multidimensional. So I feel like our guys are super marketable because they are so multidimensional. And so I think as there's a couple of things that need to happen for our players to sort of be able to make the kind of money that we all hope that they'll be able to make. I think our growth strategy hinges on really, I think, 2 key things that will ultimately change the landscape for our league. The first is expansion. Right now we're in 13 markets, 8 in the US and 5 in Canada. And it's a nice size footprint, but the larger the footprint, the easier it is to really gain that sort of national recognition and relevance across North America, which will ultimately lead to a bigger media rights relationship. And we're fortunate to have a partnership with Turner, and our games are on BR Live. And that's great because all of our games are broadcast live and you can watch our games anywhere at any time. And it actually is a real business for us, which is amazing. But the larger our footprint, I think the easier it will be to be able to continue to grow that exponentially. And that will really shift the economics of the league and hopefully lead to the players being able to make the kind of money we hope they'll all make. Maybe by the time you're coming out of college.
Thank you.
All right, so next up is Liam again.
So for the past few months, due to COVID-19, we've seen the NBA and NFL try to introduce things like the Madden tournament or the 2K tournament or the new NBA horse tournament that's being talked about right now. What creative ways has the NLL or the NLL teams kind of things that they've done to engage fans and increase revenue during this crisis?
Yeah. That's actually been my favorite. I always say there's always silver lining, even in times of crisis. And to me, one of our silver linings from this and teachable moments is that I think as a league, we, not just our league, but a lot of professional sports leagues really tied a lot of their content to games. And to the on-field or on-floor or on-court or on-ice product, and struggled to find relevance on a year-round basis. That was true when I was at the NHL too. Was always like, well, what are we going to talk about in the off season without our games? Because everything's just so focused on the game itself. And in this situation, we all of the leagues were forced to find relevance at a time when we would normally be producing content. So the expectation was that we were going to continue to produce content, but we had no games. And what you saw was like an immediate creative burst from all the leagues saying like, oh, wow, we can actually be relevant. We don't actually need games to be relevant. And our social channels have been amazing. And some of the stuff that we've done has been just really great access to our players. So doing a lot of live Instagram interviews with our guys and going really deep behind the scenes with them. I think that's one of the unique elements about our league that the other leagues don't have, is that our guys are just like super down to earth and accessible and normal. And so getting them to like be relatable is not a challenge, because they are relatable. They're like literally just like you and me and everybody else. Like they just have regular lives. And so I feel like we've been able to humanize our guys in a really good way. We've also done a lot of, oh, what are you doing? Do you want to come say hi to all these students?
Do you remember the furlough fell?
Yeah.
And he's getting the treats.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. Sorry, that's my kids. It's okay, Andrew. Don't worry about it. And so that's kind of one thing. One of the other things that we did, which I thought was really cool, was we started a lot of these sort of like lax at home, trick shots, these challenges, really with the hopes that it would get people to be a little more active at home, and have our guys sort of lead that stuff, which has been cool. We also redesigned our logo right after Corona to really show the backdrop of the logo was redesigned to show images of our fans and our players in like tiny little pixels. So if you blow it up, you could actually like find yourself in the logo, really to send the message that we're all in this together. And so those are just a couple of examples off the top of my head. But really, a lot of our content has been really focused on just going deep on telling stories that we wouldn't normally be able to tell. And it's not often that we get this kind of access to our guys. And so we really tried to take advantage of that.
I think we're going to go over to Huckleberry Jones now.
Hi, I just have a certain like job interview question in a way. Like, what were some of the tactics and sort of niches that you use to like go into job interviews and in jobs in general once you were able to acquire the jobs? Like, that's the general question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, and because I had not interviewed for a job for a really long time, I thought about it a lot when I was interviewing for this and a bunch of other jobs that I ended up interviewing for when I had decided I was going to leave the NHL. I would say my number one rule, and I always kept it in my mind, was to listen more than I spoke, because people always, no matter who they are, no matter how genuine they are, will always feel better about their conversation with you if they talked also. And nobody really enjoys feeling like they're being talked at. And so you have to sort of have confidence that whatever you end up communicating is like enough to sell yourself. But I feel like ultimately it exudes confidence to not overdo your sell, if that makes sense. To have a little bit of humility and ask a lot of questions. I think being inquisitive, assuming it's genuine, is a really good way to ingratiate yourself with someone. to show kind of intellectual curiosity and interest in learning more. Of course, like doing your homework is important and making sure you're asking the right kind of questions. But I think ultimately people feel good when they are able to engage in what feels like a more comfortable conversation. That is sort of the first piece, I guess. The second part of your question was like going into a new job. And again, for me, I was coming into a new job after being in the same job for, well, I had 2 roles, but I really, like I said, grew up at the NHL. So I always sort of felt like people viewed me the way they viewed me when I came in the door in 2006, which was a long time ago for me. So this was like an opportunity to reinvent myself in a lot of ways. And my fundamental tenet for myself as a reminder was, and I actually like I don't have my notebook here, but I actually like had it on the first page of my notebook, my first notebook that I used at the NLL, and it said in big letters, relationship before task. That's really like knowing myself. You have to know yourself. Like some people's tendency would be relationship before task, but I am a doer and I like to get stuff done. And so I have to be like, if I was being self-analytical and a little bit critical of my own tendencies, I would be honest and be able to say that sometimes I skip a lot of that stuff because I want to actually like get the job done. So I had to really remind myself going into a new role where I didn't have history with people, where they knew me personally, that I had to build relationships before I got to task. And so even if that meant that I had to get stuff done a little slower, that it was more important in the long run for me to have solid relationships with people. And then we could do more things together for a longer period of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. Great advice.
I think we're gonna go to Madeline for the last question of the night.
So my question is, what is the best like entry-level job or experience internship that basically helped you get your foot in the door in the sports world, that you think also prepared you that you have those skill sets still today?
Internship. Probably working at the NFL. Because I think it gave me the best preparation for my role ultimately at the NHL, because it was a big league and it felt very overwhelming and hard to navigate. And I think it helped to prepare me ultimately what I was walking into at the NHL when I ultimately went there and experienced how layered the organization is and how many different departments and little fiefdoms exist. I sort of got some visibility into that structure when I was an intern at the NFL. And looking back on it at the time, I definitely didn't know what to do with that. But I think it helped to frame when I walked in the door at the NHL, I think I was better able to handle how overwhelming it otherwise might have been because I had had that experience.
Jessica, thanks for taking an hour to talk to our gang here. It was great to have everybody come on. Lastly, most importantly, if people want to follow you and get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Oh, you know the answer to that. You created my Twitter account. Well, I'm on Twitter. You can follow me there. I think I'm at Jessica Berman 1, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you for that. But I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me, although out of all of my social media platforms, which is not good. You're going to yell at me for that, Joe. I'm really the worst at LinkedIn. I'm just like very behind. but email for me is the best. I'm happy to take an email from anybody. I have a personal commitment. I think I've shared this with Joe. Maybe this is like a follow-up answer to your question, Madeline, but I feel ultimately I feel like I got to where I am because a lot of people helped me in my career. A lot of people helped me. And I actually today made a list of a bunch of people that I want to just like connect with. And most of them are people who took the time to help me to navigate my career, whether it was when I was in high school, college, law school, Proskauer, NHL, always, and even now. And so my commitment to myself is that I always make time for that. And as I sort of get older, I guess there's more people who are following in my footsteps. And so the backlog is growing, but I always will get to everybody. And I have a commitment, as my kids know, because they hear me on calls with people. I do them usually on weekends, on Saturdays and Sundays, because during the week I just can't. So it's usually when I'm driving my kids to a hockey game and I let them get on their iPad. Yes, true. They're laughing. I let them get on their iPad and I take calls from students or people who are looking for career advice. So my email is jberman@nll.com, and happy to follow up one-on-one if anyone has any other questions or looking for some advice.
Great. Well, Jessica, once again, thanks for taking an hour to join us tonight. Just remember to everybody who's been on this, tell your friends. We're going to try and do this every Thursday night. On Mondays, we'll announce who our guest is going to be for the following Thursday. And tell everybody about the group too. It's important that you guys join and network amongst each other. A bunch of you have already started clubs in your high school. Hopefully when schools come back, you'll be able to start even more and then take that on to college as well. But once again, everybody stay safe. Stay safe. That's what I want.
Can I ask a question? Do you need to be in a group, or can an individual join who's in high school?
No, anybody. You can actually, a lot of them have started their own clubs in their own high schools. On the website, they basically have created kind of the template for what if someone wanted to start a club in their high school. This is what they wanted to do with 3 people. Most of these guys now have 30, 40, 50 people in their clubs that they started, within the last 6 months.
Because I have a couple of high school students who I've mentored in the last year. So I would love to just share this with them.
They can pull them in. And like I said, we're going to try and do Thursday nights for the foreseeable future at 8:15 with a whole bunch of different great guests, for the next, at least for the next month.
That's awesome.
Thanks,
well,
guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate taking the time.